of I investigates Iraq's assassins.
Tonight at 10 on WTTW. Programming on WTTW is made possible in part by viewers like you and by the following.
Hey, bud, how's pajama day?
It means School Picture Day.
No.
Life isn't always simple, but eating Heart Smart for American Heart Month is. Look for displays of heart-healthy California walnuts at Jewel Osco.
WTTW programming originates from the Renee Crown Public Media Center. The Martin and Mary L. Boyer Foundation generously supports programming on WTTW in loving memory of Alan I. Boyer.
Hey, bud, how's pajama day?
It means School Picture Day.
No.
Life isn't always simple, but eating Heart Smart for American Heart Month is. Look for displays of heart-healthy California walnuts at Jewel Osco.
Make Wednesday night on PBS your destination for exploration, beginning with nature.
Surrounded by blistering desert, Big Bend hides a mountain kingdom bursting in life.
Followed by Nova.
The menagerie of modern plastics that these days is both a miracle and a menace.
And Europe's New Wild.
A wildlife reintroduction is making Europe's untamed heart even wilder.
Nature, Nova, and Europe's New Wild.
Hi, Chicago. I'm Dwight, and you're watching WTTW.
This evening's presentation of Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Polk Brothers Foundation, working to make Chicago a place where all people have the opportunity to reach their full potential.
Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. On the show tonight.
And if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
Dramatic video kicks off former President Donald Trump's second impeachment. We get reaction to the first day from members of Congress.
The U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Illinois may be out of a job. What President Biden's call for resignations could mean for public corruption probes in Illinois.
One of the first markets we're going to focus on is Chicago.
From Warp Speed to free Uber rides, a fresh look at Chicago's rollout of the COVID-19 vaccine.
The future of travel as airlines look to survive the pandemic and prepare for the post-pandemic future.
The devastating financial impact of the pandemic in Latino communities, driving some to homelessness.
Every word is signed, so it looks as if we're painting pictures in the air.
And inside a Reform Judaism congregation in Skokie that's provided exclusive service to the deaf and hard of hearing for nearly 50 years. But first, some of today's top stories. Illinois taxpayers will not pay higher income taxes under Governor J.B. Pritzker's proposed budget plan. Pritzker today gave lawmakers an overview of his budget, which would flatten spending in 2022. His office says it would shift more of a tax burden onto businesses by closing $900 million in corporate tax loopholes and redirect revenue like the cigarette tax, which is earmarked for capital improvements, into the general fund. Pritzker is expected to detail his plan in a budget address next Wednesday, and there's more of his overview on our website. Chicagoans can now travel to and from 3 states and 1 territory without requiring a negative COVID test or 10-day quarantine. Chicago public health officials update the city's standing travel order, and Alaska, North Dakota, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico have moved into the yellow tier because of their lower rates. Chicago's own test positivity rate is at 4.9%, down from 5.7% a week ago. Today, CDPH Commissioner Dr. Allison Arwady noted an unintended but positive side effect of the city's lowered COVID-19 rates. It's that hospitalizations for the flu are lower as well when they're typically much higher in February. And coming up later in the broadcast, we'll have more on the future of air travel. And Illinois public health officials report nearly 2,100 new cases and 20 additional deaths since yesterday. The state's total case count is now more than 1.15 million since the start of the pandemic, and 19,686 people have died. The state's test positivity rate is 4%. And anxious Chicago Public Schools parents hope to know by tomorrow whether their children have a plan for returning to in-person schooling. The Chicago Teachers Union's 25,000 members are voting through midnight tonight on whether to accept a proposal from Chicago Public Schools that would return pre-kindergarten and cluster program students back to the classroom as early as Thursday. Kindergarten through 8th grade teachers and staff would phase back into their buildings at different times over late February into early March. And now to Paris with reaction from local members of Congress on former President Donald Trump's impeachment trial. Paris.
Brad, former President Donald Trump's second impeachment trial began in the Senate today. Meanwhile, the House and President Joe Biden continue to negotiate the next COVID stimulus bill. Joining us now with all of that and more are Congressman Danny Davis, a Democrat from the Austin neighborhood, Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, a Democrat from Evanston, and Congressman Jesus Chuy Garcia, a Democrat from the Little Village neighborhood. A note to our viewers, we invited every Republican from Illinois' congressional delegation, but none accepted our invitation tonight. First off, let's talk about former President Trump's second impeachment trial. It started today with some striking video introduced by the impeachment managers. The actual video shown to senators has some strong language. Just a forewarning, let's take a look.
We fight like hell. And if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
Congresswoman Schakowsky, despite this, it appears that there are no more than 5 Republican senators that could vote to convict, far short of what would be needed. Do you anticipate any minds changing over the course of this trial?
Incredibly, I really don't. I think that the majority in the Senate of Republicans are just scared to death to vote for something that I think a large number of them know is absolutely impeachable and that he should be impeached. The cowardice of these Republicans to break loose from Donald Trump is just astonishing to me.
And there was a vote today on the constitutionality to move forward impeaching and convicting a former president, and that passed 56-44. Congressman Danny Davis, what about the Trump defense argument that it indeed is not constitutional to impeach and then have an impeachment trial for a former president?
Well, I think it's already been debunked. Everybody knows that there's precedent. There has been precedent. And trying to find a defense, the Republicans know that there is no defense. They have no defense. So the only thing that they can do is try and skirt around the issues and pretend that it's unconstitutional, can't be done, shouldn't be done, never been done, and everybody knows that's a farce.
Congressman Garcia, your Illinois colleague on the Republican side of the aisle, Adam Kinzinger, wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post saying he believes senators should vote to convict, that the consequences of acquittal would be terrible for American democracy. What do you believe the consequences of an acquittal would be?
It would be a setback for a constitutional rule and order. It would continue to pit the country in a very divisive way. It would mean that possibly distortions and lies and conspiracy theories continue to be a matter of fact in American politics. That is what is at stake, and that's what the members of the Senate have to decide on. No one, the case made by the managers was clear and unequivocal. There was a cause and effect. Donald Trump incited the invasion of the Capitol. He encouraged that attack, and he must be held accountable because there are consequences for the future of our democracy.
Congresswoman Schakowsky, Kinzinger has also started this Country First Political Action Committee to try and move the Republican Party away from Trump. Do you believe that kind of effort will be successful?
Well, I think that Adam Kinzinger is probably running for something and thinks that sticking with Donald Trump is probably not a great idea, especially in the state of Illinois. you know, for really 3.5 years, he pretty much voted down the line with Donald Trump. And I'm happy if he, even if it's a political, that he is taking that position. I certainly do wish that other Republicans would follow. Let me say one other thing. Mitch McConnell could have easily brought the Senate back to deal with the impeachment. He decided to wait until he was no longer president to make sure that he had this thin argument to make that it was unconstitutional to impeach someone who was no longer in office. He set the table and he set the timeline. And I'm glad Adam is, you know, saying what he's saying. But, you know, it's one person that is, and just a few that are doing that.
And McConnell, I believe, did vote against the constitutionality of moving forward with these proceedings. Let's switch gears a bit to the $1.9 trillion COVID stimulus bill. Congressman Davis, do you believe there will be any Republican votes on this final package?
Oh, I think we will have a few, not many, just like we've got a few right now who are willing to vote to impeach or to find the president, former president, guilty. But I don't think we'll have many. But what we've decided and what the leadership in both the House and the Senate have decided is we are moving ahead. We start markup tomorrow. We have a 3-day markup plan in my committee on Ways and Means, where $941 billion of that package comes through this committee. And so we're moving ahead. No matter what the Republicans do, we are moving ahead.
The question on a lot of people's minds is that $1,400 proposed direct payment to single filers. Congressman Garcia, will there be an income threshold like $75,000 where if you're in more than that, then you wouldn't be eligible for this payment?
For individuals, it will be $75,000. For a household of two or two filers in a household, it's $150,000. I think those are reasonable. It also ensures that we are as universal as possible in the relief efforts. In Illinois alone, let's recall that potentially up to 500,000 families are at risk of eviction as we speak. So Congress must provide relief fast. This is very important. And of course, $1.8 trillion relief measure would also provide state and local assistance. Those governments needed. They're critical in getting our economy back and running and providing basic services and personnel that are essential for municipalities and for the state to continue functioning if we're to have a quick recovery.
And I want to pick up on that state and local government part a bit later in the show, but we have to leave it right there for the time being. We'll be joined again by the Congress members to discuss COVID vaccinations and much more in a bit. And reminder, we did invite every Republican member of Illinois' congressional delegation, but none accepted our invitation. We do thank Representatives Davis, Schakowsky, and Garcia for joining us. And Illinois' U.S. Senators Dick Durbin and Tammy Duckworth are pushing back against President Joe Biden. This for the apparent decision to terminate nearly all U.S. attorneys across the country, including John Lausch here in the Northern District of Illinois. Lausch's tenure is marked by a series of ongoing public corruption investigations, including into the alleged ComEd bribery scheme, which implicates former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan. And joining us to discuss what a change could mean for those investigations are Patrick Collins, a former assistant U.S. attorney who helped lead the prosecution of former Illinois Governor George Ryan on corruption charges. He's currently a partner at King & Spalding. And Renato Mariotti, a former assistant U.S. attorney and a partner at Thompson Coburn LLP. Welcome back, both of you, to Chicago Tonight. Pat Collins, I want to start with you. What we know is that the acting U.S. Attorney General asked for the resignations of nearly all U.S. attorneys, including Lausch, by the end of the month. Does this follow precedent, or is it a step further?
Well, I think, Paris, there's a pretty good argument it follows precedent. These are presidentially appointed U.S. attorneys. They serve at the pleasure of the president. But I think the key question here is just because the president can do it, should he do it? And in particular, should he do it here in Illinois, where we have this sensitive investigation going on that clearly John Lausch and his team of prosecutors is managing aggressively on behalf of the people of Illinois. And so I think the question is, can an exception be made? We do know, based on the reports, that 2 exceptions have been made already. So it's this wholesale termination, which again does happen whether you're Republican or Democrat. I don't think either side can say this is something new. But I do think the question for us is, there are 93 of these folks appointed across the country. This should be done on a case-by-case basis. And I think at least that's what our senators are saying to the Biden administration.
And the Tribune has a story just out right now that Lausch has not yet submitted his resignation. He does have until the end of the month to do so. In a joint statement released today, as we mentioned, Senators Duckworth and Durbin said, quote, while the president has the right to remove U.S. attorneys, there is precedent for U.S. attorneys in the Northern District of Illinois to remain in office to conclude sensitive investigations. Renato Mariotti, usually the U.S. senators from a particular state have outsized influence on who the U.S. attorney is going to be. Are you surprised that this move was made despite what Duckworth and Durbin have asked for?
I am surprised, and I was surprised to see reports that they weren't consulted, particularly Senator Durbin, who is the chair of the Judiciary Committee and Majority Whip in the United States Senate. So I do think that there may have just been a snafu or a rollout issue here. One would think that our Democratic senators and a Democratic presidential administration would be in sync. So I do think that's an issue that they're going to need to figure out. I will say, as I sit here today, it's not clear to me whether John is going to be asked to resign or not.
It seems like we're getting conflicting reports. I mean, the U.S. attorney, the acting attorney general, did ask for all but those 2 U.S. attorneys. But as we're saying right now, Lausch has yet to submit his resignation. Pat Collins, would it be unprecedented for the president to perhaps reconsider this move, as Durbin and Duckworth have asked for?
Again, I don't think it's unprecedented. The president has already made 2 exceptions. He could make a 3rd. I think it's important, Paris, for your viewers to understand, and certainly John and his team are really important. The people who are running these cases, the career prosecutors, they're not going anywhere. The agents of the FBI and the other agencies aren't going anywhere. And those are the people who are doing the daily lifting. But there is a continuity and there's a cadence to these investigations. And clearly John Lausch and John Kokoris, the 2 leaders of the U.S. Attorney's Office in Chicago, are making the big decisions. They're making the prosecutive decisions. And to sort of have them pull away right now doesn't make a lot of sense if you just want good government, politics aside.
And we know the comment investigation had started before Lausch's tenure, although it certainly escalated in the last 3-4 years. Renato Mariotti, how do you think that particular case, which has implicated Mike Madigan as public official A, how will that be affected by a changeover at the top?
I don't think there actually will be an impact. I agree with Pat that there are very fine prosecutors leading that investigation, like Amar Bachu, the chief of the public corruption section. They're going to still remain there, and they're going to still be pushing this case forward, regardless of who's in charge. And we've had, moments in the past, like when Pat Fitzgerald had stepped down, where we had an interim U.S. attorney for a period of time, and certainly John Kokoris could step into that role, who's the number 2 person right now. So I'm not concerned about it as a practical matter. I am concerned, though, about the public perception of this. And I think what's really important is that, for an appearance sake, that there's no appearance that there's any slowdown or any snafu regarding this investigation.
Paris, I would just say, Paris, I would just say, just to follow up on Renato's point, I mean, one of the things that I believe, and I'm not from either side of the aisle, but I think the last administration, there was a politicization of the Department of Justice, and it's certainly occurred previously. I do think, to Renato's perception point, we should be particularly mindful of that issue now, because it's not just, justice being meted out is whether it's the perception that it's being meted out. And if John is taken out and things don't go forward, then people will ask, well, was it because the new person came in and scuttled the investigation, which would probably be an unfair criticism. I think people need to understand, the president and the senators, that there's a real cadence to these things. There's a real continuity issue. There's a real flow to them. And then just to take somebody out in the middle of it, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Now, if the investigation was over, this very sensitive one, then it could probably be better justified. But I don't see the rush to it. And Mr. Lausch could transition out over a period of time. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to do it right now.
So, Renato, Pat mentioned the politicization or the appearance of politicization under the last presidential administration. A lot of that fell under the hands of Attorney General Bill Barr. Barr was in Chicago with the U.S. Attorney Lausch talking that crime was going down because of increased federal scrutiny on crime, but we know crime has not gone down, violent crime that is. Could that have factored into the decision here?
I don't think it did. I think this was a blanket decision. It appeared to be that all of the U.S. attorneys were being asked to resign, and that's pretty commonplace in a new administration, as Pat had mentioned earlier. I do think that Barr politicized the Justice Department, and I do think that action in particular was an example of former President Trump using our city as a talking point, and I didn't appreciate the former Attorney General using his purse to do so.
So, Pat Collins, you're saying a transition should happen, I guess, over time, if that is going to go forward. Are there any names out there of folks that, at this very early stage, would be considered to replace Lausch?
There's a lot of great lawyers in town who have the experience. I certainly wouldn't want to mention any names tonight, but, you know, I do think, and I don't understand how this politics stuff works. I mean, worst case, if John has to tender his resignation, and then the office is run by John Kokoris as number 2. I don't understand, particularly with Senator Durbin at the Judiciary Committee, why John couldn't be reappointed and go into the queue, realizing he has to go through the process again. But, you know, that's another option such that there wouldn't be too much disruption. But are there other people, if John was forced to step aside under these circumstances, there's a dozen great experienced lawyers, men and women. We've never had a woman U.S. attorney. We should keep that in mind. There's some great people in this city that could do a great job and continue on the aggressive work. But the career prosecutors and agents are really doing the day-to-day stuff. And I think the people can have confidence that those folks aren't going anywhere, and that's critical.
All right, well, we're going to have to keep following this. Our thanks right now to Patrick Collins and Renato Mariotti. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And now, Brandis, we go back to you.
Thanks, Paris. Chicago's cracking down on people who are trying to game the system to get a coronavirus vaccine. Amanda Vinicky joins us now with more on that and other updates in the COVID vaccine rollout.
Brandis, just a bit ago, you mentioned that hospitalizations related to the flu are down. Chicago Public Health Commissioner Dr. Allison Arwoody says that the annual efforts to encourage people to get the flu vaccine meant that the city was prepared when, quicker than anybody had expected, the coronavirus vaccines received emergency approval, and Chicago was tasked with distributing them to residents. There are some differences between the two vaccines, of course. The 2 doses required of the COVID vaccine and the ultra cold storage needs, also demand.
What's been different about this is we've never had the demand outstrip the supply so much. Typically, when we're trying to do flu vaccine, we've got all the flu vaccine and we're working on trying to get people, to be motivated to take it.
During a panel today put on by the Executives Club of Chicago, Walgreens President John Stanley said all of that was a logistical challenge. Walgreens was contracted by the feds to give vaccinations in long-term care and assisted living facilities across the country. Illinois has had some hiccups with that, but Stanley says things are on track for completion by mid-April. Getting to that point required coordinating with nursing homes over the holidays, by the way, and building an ultra-cold storage supply chain, also training 27,000 pharmacists.
Which takes special gloves and handling procedures, monitoring the storage very carefully to make sure it stays at temperature, and then go through a very careful defrosting and mixing procedure prior to vaccinating patients. We had to build all those processes out across the entire chain, across the entire country.
The coordination between the feds, local public health departments, and private businesses is complex, says Dr. Matthew Hepburn. He's the Department of Defense's lead on Operation Warp Speed. The fact that it's getting done, he says, that should be appreciated.
I do think we should marvel at how difficult that task is
to do in the setting of a pandemic, in the setting of an emergency.
And the goal isn't just to get it done, it is to get as much of the American public vaccinated as possible, and to do that in record time. Even as it feels excruciatingly slow for those who are waiting but unable to get access to the shot, there is also confusion surrounding where to get it, concerns that communities of color aren't getting vaccinated at the rate of people who are white, and demand for the vaccine is such that Chicago simply can't keep up. The city is receiving 6,000 doses a day, while more than 600,000 Chicagoans are eligible to get them. When you get that first shot, Chicago gives the recipient a code to reschedule for the next one. Dr. Arwady says that some people are sharing that QR code with family and friends.
I can't emphasize enough, please do not try to game the system. Please do not try to share. If you get a code, if you get an appointment that's been directed for you, when you share that, or if you feel like, oh, I found a secret way to get this, like off a message board or something, all you are doing is creating extra work for the health department.
Already says that Chicago does have ways to track these codes, and that before getting the shot, folks will be asked to be honest and to certify that they are eligible for it. She says the city does count on people to be honest there. The city also counting on people who get that first dose to get their second one at the scheduled time. The short supply of vaccine is why Chicago has not opened up mass vaccination sites like we see elsewhere.
We have done all of the planning. We have done the walkthroughs. We are completely ready to stand up mass vaccination sites at, we've looked at the United Center. Yes, we've looked at Wrigley Field. Yes, we've looked at McCormick. We've looked at all of these settings, but it's about vaccine. So if we stood up a vaccine site that could do 5,000 doses a day, which we could, operationally we could do that, we only get 6,000 doses a day right now.
She says the city will open mass vaccination sites when it receives more of the vaccine, really when it has more shots to give. She adds that unlike places in, say, Arizona, people might not want to stand around in an open air stadium in Chicago right now, given that, it's supposed to get up to a whopping, 7 degrees tonight. Now, Operation Warp Speed's Dr. Hepburn didn't share anything more about when vaccine production and distribution may be ramped up. Dr. Arwady said that she expects that Chicago will begin to get more in the next couple of weeks. But Dr. Hepburn says that already the Fed's Operation Warp Speed is gearing up should a variant strain of the coronavirus necessitate creating something like a booster shot. He compared it to a movie sequel.
A lot of times the sequel's not as good as the original, so I get that, but did you like Empire Strikes Back better? Did you like Godfather 2 better than Godfather 1? The sequel, I think, is going to be better this time because we've actually learned the lessons for RNA as example to say, look how fast we could go. But as fast as we went, we can go faster.
And along those lines, when, praise be, this pandemic is over, the doctors also say that the systems that have been put in place to deal with it will allow them, hopefully, to pivot and then use those very same systems to focus on other health issues and outreach. And now, by the way, Walgreens also just announcing that it has formed a partnership with Uber so that those getting the vaccine and who need a ride can be taken to Walgreens pharmacies and their other vaccination clinics. And Chicago is going to be one of the markets where it'll be debuting that program. Brandis, back to you.
Practice in patience, Amanda. Thank you. Up next, a local synagogue providing service to the deaf. Stick around. Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight, Black Voices. What do you believe prevents a strong coalition of Black and Latino communities forming across the communities?
I want us to, as a nation, to find a way to come together.
Go down the block, get it from someone local, and keep the money in the community.
Black joy and the Black experience is magical.
And we have much more ahead on the program, including what local Congress members think about the possible resignation of U.S. Attorney John Lausch. But first, for nearly half a century, a place of worship in Skokie has served deaf Jewish congregants. But now, that special synagogue just north of the city is fighting to stay afloat. Chicago Tonight's Evan Garcia visited Bene Shalom to learn more.
Not only do we speak our services in English and in Hebrew and in Aramaic, but we also sign our services. Every word is signed, so it looks as if we're painting pictures in the air.
Rabbi Douglas Goldhamer's Reformed Judaism congregation, B'nai Shalom, in Skokie, is often cited as the nation's only full-service synagogue dedicated to the deaf community.
Let us welcome the angels into our Shabbat prayer service.
All services are sign language interpreted, and for now, they're broadcast from the rabbi's Evanston home via Zoom. But soon, the congregation could shut down for good. More on that later.
So first I do exercises on the bed to strengthen my leg power.
Rabbi Goldhamer, who injured his leg last year and receives daily help from good friend Reverend Richard Mercer, says some interpretations of Jewish law exclude the deaf from religious obligations.
The Talmud says, Cheresh shoteh v'katan, the deaf, the imbecile, and the minor. That means a person under 13 years of age. Patur mikol mitzvot shebat Torah, are exempt from all the commandments of the Torah. Get this now, even rejoicing.
In the early 70s, few, if any, synagogues made accommodations for the deaf and hard of hearing. Goldhamer says he saw deaf Jews attending church services as a spiritual outlet, so he started B'nai Shalom in 1972 to give the deaf a place to worship.
I wasn't supposed to talk. I wasn't supposed to hear with anything, and I wasn't supposed to learn.
Sari Daybook was diagnosed with severe to profound hearing loss at the age of 1. She started going to B'nai Shalom at 5 years old and is now a rabbinical student in the signing choir under her longtime mentor, Rabbi Sherry Chen.
The two of us always communicated.
But now, B'nai Shalom's fate is uncertain. Goldhamer says a wealthy group of donors that traditionally helped support the synagogue is dwindling.
And they knew the difficulties we had financially, and they gave us gifts every single month. But unfortunately, just as I'm 75 now, they were 65 then, and they're not alive anymore, and so we need help.
A GoFundMe set up last year is a few thousand short of its $50,000 goal, and Goldhamer says the congregation needs to raise an additional $50,000 this year to cover its $300,000 annual budget.
So, Sari, we're in this place that is welcoming of obviously the deaf community. You know, we're wearing these transparent face masks so you can lip read easier. We have Rabbi Chen here to help interpret. What would it mean to you if B'nai Shalom would shut down?
If we're done, I have nowhere to go. I have nowhere to pray. I have nowhere where I can rely to have faith in God.
Karen Aguilar, director of the Chicago Hearing Society, says it's incumbent on all of us to accommodate everyone.
It might take an extra minute to arrange an accommodation or a couple extra minutes during a Zoom meeting. But it's so crucial that we ensure that people who are deaf, deafblind, and hard of hearing are included in everything that we do.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Evan Garcia.
And if you'd like to learn American Sign Language, Sari Daybook is teaching an 8-week introductory ASL class via Zoom starting February 21st. You can visit our website to learn more. Still to come on Chicago Tonight, members of Congress discuss the COVID-19 vaccine rollout and the hurdles that some are facing to get a vaccination. The future of travel as airlines try to survive the pandemic and hope for a takeoff post-pandemic. And a look at how the pandemic is harming finances for some Latino families, making them more likely to lose their homes. But first, some more of today's top stories. Aircraft manufacturer Boeing raised a few bucks in January by delivering 26 new planes, including 21 of the MAX jets, which were grounded for 21 months after 2 crashes killed 346 people. Those jets went to United as well as Southwest and American. The Chicago-based company is pinning hopes for more cash and profits this year on the MAX's recovery, though the aircraft market remains weak because of the pandemic's effect on air travel. And we'll have more on the future of international air travel a bit later in the program. The Big Ten basketball tournament will be played in Indianapolis this year instead of Chicago, as had been planned. Officials say the men will play a few blocks from the women's tournament on the same week in mid-March. The league says hosting both the men and the women at the same site allows for cohesive testing and medical protocols for both events, as well as centralized accommodations around the competition venues. This year's Final Four is also being played in Indianapolis. Big Ten says it plans to return to Chicago in 2023. And now back to Paris with more from members of Illinois' congressional delegation. Paris.
Thanks, Brandis. Earlier in the program, we discussed impeachment and a new round of COVID stimulus, and we're joined again by Congress members Danny Davis, Jan Schakowsky, and Chuy Garcia. Congresswoman Schakowsky, I want to pick up where we left off in our last segment with the part of the stimulus that's going to go to state and local governments. So how much money is Illinois going to get for its budget, and the city of Chicago for its cash-strapped budget?
Well, we're going to see a considerable amount of money. And, you know, our municipalities, large and small, our county, are really struggling because, of course, there's been that loss of income from sales taxes, et cetera. And we have been adamant about the fact that state and county and local governments need to get the money. It's going to be substantial. It's absolutely going to make sure that we can keep the trains running. Literally, municipalities would have had to cut back on their transportation systems, their health care, their first responders. It would have been impossible. And I wanted to say that we know that 72% of Americans absolutely support the president's American Rescue Plan. And that includes 53% of Republicans. They understand that their communities need the help, that they need the help. And I think it's a really bad vote for Republicans to go against this wildly popular legislation that's going to mean so much to people who are hurting.
Another possible part of this legislation, Congressman Davis, is a proposal for more than $3,000 per child for child care costs. And this is bipartisan because Senator Romney on the Republican side has introduced a similar proposal. Will this be a part of the stimulus package? And tell us how it works.
It's the most wonderful thing that's ever been put on paper and will be one of the greatest things that ever happened for children. The largest part of the poverty population in America are children. The most vulnerable individuals in America are children. And when we do something that's going to benefit children, I mean, we are doing the work of the master. I am so excited about our approach to dealing with the needs of low-income people and the needs of children in this package until I don't know what to do. And to make it even better, it comes through my subcommittee that I chair.
I take it you're an aye vote on that, Congressman Davis. Congressman Garcia, will that be a part of the stimulus, or is that going to be a separate proposal?
It will be a part of the rescue plan of the president. It is essential. It expands the benefits in the right places. It helps children. It helps families who are in dire need of this assistance. As soon as the president signed this bill, we'll use the IRS again out to everyone who qualifies, families, and for children who are the primary beneficiaries. They will come in the form of monthly payments.
Monthly payments. I'm sorry, Congressman, we're having a few audio problems.
Several of us are co-sponsors.
We're having a few, I'm sorry, Congressman, we're having a few audio problems there, but we got the gist of what you were saying there. Congresswoman Schakowsky, something that Democrats had hoped to also be a part of this was a $15 minimum wage. Does it look like that is going to go by the wayside?
Well, we'll see. It was as of yesterday, and I think today as well. It was still in the plan, and my hope is that we can do that. There is, well, aside from what Danny Davis was saying, I think there's nothing more that would bring the economy back than raising the wages of Americans, so that they don't have to rely on the government, that they are able to spend money in the community, make sure that they go to the small businesses and bring the economy back to life. And so I think it makes a whole lot of sense for us to raise the minimum wage. I'd love to see us do it in this package. There may be an argument about whether it's eligible to be in the package, but what I have heard so far is that the Senate actually was saying that they thought it could be done.
I should mention the Congressional Budget Office did score that and found that it would actually cost jobs. I want to move on to COVID vaccines. Congressman Davis, we know about the disparities in the Black and brown community. Have vaccines picked up in those communities because they were lagging behind before?
It is, in fact, picking up, and we understand that many African Americans, for example, were reluctant early on to make use of the vaccine. That's beginning to change. There has been an all-out effort from every level of government on down, as well as many physician groups, private citizens, regular groups of individuals, urging people to make use of the vaccine and urging the government to make sure that the distribution gets to places where there is the greatest need. There are about 200 sites in my congressional district where people can go and get vaccinated. And we want to make sure that the equipment is available. We want to make sure that the medicine is there for them. And so we're making progress with the distribution of the vaccine, dealing with the disparities that exist. We're not out of the water, and I'm not suggesting that we are, but we are indeed making progress.
Congresswoman Schakowsky, before we go, the decision by the Biden administration not to retain U.S. Attorney John Lausch, was that the right move?
Well, I think they were asking all of the attorneys general to resign. This is typical of an administration at the very beginning, and then they are eligible to come back and ask for the appointment. So I think this was not just targeted; it was nationwide.
All right, and we have to leave it there. A reminder, we did invite every Republican member of Illinois' congressional delegation, but none accepted our invitation tonight. We do thank Representatives Davis, Schakowsky, and Garcia for joining us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And now to Brandis with a look at the future of international travel amid the pandemic. Brandis.
Paris, thank you. For most of us, travel, especially international travel, has been off the agenda for the last year. As the coronavirus pandemic worsened, many countries imposed restrictions on visitors from abroad. And within the U.S., states have imposed their own restrictions. Now with vaccines being rolled out, the travel industry is hoping to see a post-pandemic travel surge. But that travel experience may be very different, and you may even need a vaccination passport. Joining us to share their insights are Tracy Rucinski, Chicago-based aviation correspondent for Reuters News Agency, Jeanette Seha, a California-based travel journalist and travel advisor, and Inger Burnett Ziegler, associate professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at Northwestern University's Feinberg School of Medicine. Welcome all of you to Chicago tonight. Jeanette Seha, let's start with you, please. As a travel journalist, what has the last year been like for you?
Oh, thank you so much for having me on. It's been quite an interesting year. I have done just one domestic trip, and for me, that's the longest I've ever been landlocked, essentially at home. I think the focus has been, instead of where to travel, how to travel, whether you're doing a staycation or you're doing a small road trip to, a national park. I think I had to pivot on how I'm covering travel. Instead of where, it's more how.
And you said you've only traveled once domestically. Most of us have not traveled at all in this last year or so. What's it been like? Was it different? Were you apprehensive about getting on a plane?
Yes, I traveled from Los Angeles to Nashville. Both of my parents live in Nashville, and my mother had multiple surgeries, so I actually went there to help take care of her for a while. So it was interesting, though. I will say I have flown in and out of LAX so many times. It was very empty. You get in through all the security lines very quickly, but it's the most empty that I've seen it in my entire life. As well as the Nashville airport was also very, very empty.
I guess one benefit, it's not so crowded. Tracy Ruzinski, Americans, obviously, we face a variety of restrictions if we're traveling or considering traveling to another country, depending on the status of the virus here and there. Where can U.S. travelers go internationally right now?
Well, not a lot of places. Americans are banned from most of Europe, but we can go to most of Latin America, Mexico, the Caribbean. And so we've seen all of the US airlines really add a lot of flights to these destinations south of the border.
And at the same time, they're adding those flights, sounds like, while they've trimmed flights to Europe, for example?
Yes, there are very few flights to Europe right now. And I think you would find out of Chicago very few direct flights anywhere. There are some flights to London, to Paris, to Frankfurt, but a lot of the international flying that Chicagoans would have been used to before the pandemic just isn't there right now anymore.
Ingrid Burnett-Ziegler, we've had you on the show several times in this pandemic to talk about people's behavior and how we're managing it, and I'm sure it's been impactful in many ways, but how do you think people are likely to react on the other side of this pandemic? Are we going to see a release of pent-up demand?
I think so. I think people are really eager to have something to look forward to for the future. A lot of the folks that I work with are talking about feeling stuck, this sense of boredom, this sense of feeling trapped in their homes, in this routine, not having the typical outlets for joy and pleasure that they would typically have, and really wanting something to look forward to. Some folks may have had exciting travel plans last year that were canceled, and eager to be able to put those plans back onto the agenda. And I think people are thinking about safe ways to be able to incorporate that into their calendar for this year.
Ingrid, do you also think, is it possible that the fear that we've lived with for this last, almost a year, could that remain? And people are fearful of what might be a return to normal.
I think that that's certainly present. I think folks are concerned about the vaccine, concerned about returning to work, concerned about what the new normal is going to look like. However, I do think folks are experiencing what has been coined as this caution fatigue, and really weighing the risk against the benefits. And again, folks are really wanting to be able to soak in those benefits of connecting with folks and getting back out into the world.
Tracy Ruzinski, are airlines, are they still restricting the number of passengers on planes to allow more social distance?
No, Delta is the only airline that continues to block middle seats. They announced yesterday that they'll continue to do that through April. At least they haven't made a decision as what they'll do beyond that. But otherwise, if you book a flight, you should expect it. You should expect that it could be full.
And what about passengers and masking? And are they abiding by the rules? Are airlines enforcing that requirement?
Airlines are trying to enforce it. We now have a federal mask mandate that recently went into effect. So anybody who is not wearing a mask on an airplane, in an airport, or on any means of public transportation can face a fine of $250 to up to $1,500. Airlines have also been putting passengers on no-fly lists if they refuse to comply.
And Jeanette Seha, what are people in the industry expecting the post-pandemic travel world to look like?
I feel it's a mixture. We're optimistic, but we're also very realistic and taking it week by week as there are new developments, but there are also some setbacks. And I think on a global scale, you see how some countries like New Zealand are advancing and other countries So it's such an interesting place to be in the industry. It's really just taking it day by day, week by week, and hoping for the best. I feel most people in the industry are optimistic for the fall, and most travelers are looking at least to travel by the fall, maybe winter. That's what I'm getting a lot of questions about, also from travelers. They say, when can I go to Paris? When can I go to certain locations that are currently closed right now for Americans, but maybe in due time they'll reopen. So they're still keeping their hopes to travel abroad open.
And Tracy Brzezinski, in the lead, we mentioned the possibility of a vaccination passport. Is that kind of thing possible in the future for both domestic and international travel?
Well, there are a lot of people working on making that a possibility right now from different airlines. We've seen United Airlines and American Airlines both roll out a kind of app by which you can upload your negative COVID test or your vaccination records, where you can look to see what the requirements are in the different countries where you're traveling. But the challenge is to create a platform that can really work across all different countries and that can be accessible to people who may not have a smartphone. And then they're also looking into privacy issues as well. But I would think that in the near future, that is something that will be part of your international travel, just like your physical passport.
And briefly, before I let each of you go, when this does return to something like normal, where's the first place you're heading? Tracy, let's start with you.
Well, I'll be heading to Madrid, where I lived for a long time and still have a lot of family and friends and miss it a lot.
That sounds lovely. Jeanette?
I will be heading to France, where I usually go every year, and yes, that'll be the first place I go.
Inger?
Bali was on my 2020 travel plans, and I hope to be able to add it back to the calendar as soon as it is safe.
All right, I'm going with you guys. All right, safe travel to all of you, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Up next, WTTW News Director Ugo Balta on the economic toll of COVID-19 in a conversation that first aired on Saturday's Chicago Tonight Latino Voices. But first, a look at the weather.
Throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, the Latino community has been at a heightened risk of infection and death. But the coronavirus has not only endangered the health of Latinos, it's also harming their finances and making them more likely to lose their homes. Recently, we spoke with Dan Fulweiler, CEO of Esperanza Health Centers in Gage Park, about how the pandemic has brought many Latino communities to the brink.
Almost 20% of our patients as a whole have had COVID by now, and it's been very difficult on every level. We receive requests from people all the time for things that might surprise you. We had a patient a couple weeks ago come to our patient emergency fund because they needed $200 to pay for a cremation. Those kind of things are heart-wrenching, and it's really hard to see how the pandemic has affected us.
Joining us now with more are Charmaine Runes, a reporter with Southside Weekly, Justin Agrelo, a reporter with City Bureau, and Maria Inés Zamudio, a reporter with WBEZ Chicago. Maria Inés, last fall you reported that 87% of Latino households disclosed having serious financial problems due to the pandemic. What is the picture like now for those families?
Look, the situation for Latinos is bad. During the pandemic, workers have been either laid off or their hours have been reduced. And the reality is that the industries where a lot of Latinos are concentrated are the ones that have also lost a lot of jobs. For example, we've lost over 8 million jobs in the hospitality industry alone. And when we look at the industries that are still doing really well, that haven't seen a lot of layoffs, we also see that those industries just don't employ a lot of Latinos. So as a result, you're seeing a lot of families struggling financially. A poll that I reported on last September showed that about 72% of Latino households in Chicago reported having serious financial problems, compared to 36% of white households in the city. So that kind of shows you the situation that Latinos are living in right now. And the worst part about it is that for Latinos who don't have proper documentations, or they live in mixed status families, they often don't receive the stimulus money that other Americans have received. So that puts people in a really vulnerable situation.
Justin, you've reported that despite the moratorium on evictions, people are still getting evicted. What are some of the stories you're hearing?
Yeah, we're hearing a lot of different stories. I think people don't realize that eviction court is still open, that landlords can file evictions against tenants who supposedly pose a threat. And, you know, landlords never really needed the court system to displace Black and brown people, and we're definitely still hearing that now. People, landlords are using illegal lockouts, shutting off utilities, threats of violence, et cetera, to really move people. And we're sort of hearing a lot of that. We spoke with 30 different renters for a recent story that we just published called The Housing Cliff, and it really just highlighted how easily folks have fallen through the cracks, and how little or like how ineffective the eviction moratorium has been at keeping people in place.
Charmaine, have we seen an uptick in homelessness since the pandemic began? What are the challenges to collecting data on the homelessness?
Yeah, so it is hard to say, but it does seem incredibly likely that we've seen an uptick in homelessness, just based on the number of evictions and people not being able to make rent and not being sure where to go. I think the trouble with really documenting homelessness and whether that has increased or not is because the shelter system has experienced so much chaos because of COVID, right? Like the number of beds that you can fit in one space is no longer the same because of the need to social distance. And so I think that, you know, we likely have seen an uptick. In fact, in 2020, during the point in time count, which is an annual count that the Department of Family and Support Services conducts every year to sort of get a snapshot of who is experiencing homelessness at, you know, on a single night in January. We actually saw a 2% increase from 2019. And that was at the very beginning of the year. That was before COVID had really hit the city. You know, and a lot of that increase came from folks who were staying on the street as opposed to being in the shelter.
Again, that conversation first aired on our show, Chicago Tonight Latino Voices. You can watch the extended version on our website, and you can catch Chicago Tonight Latino Voices here on Saturday evenings at 6 p.m. And that's our show for this Tuesday night.
Please join us tomorrow night live at 7.
Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe and warm. Good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that's proud to serve its community through pro bono legal services.